character shone through that experience to inspire any and all who would listen to the struggle that he had endured. And so we have the privilege of being inspired tonight by a man who I have heard testify today under the most sarcastic cross-examination one can imagine, and maintained throughout it all a dignified and firm insistence upon the essential thing to all mankind, the truth. And so it is for not only myself, but for you, a truly rare privilege for which we should express gratitude and true admiration in the opportunity to hear tonight from Dr. Tony Martin. Sir.
Thank you very much, Doug Christie. I'm very humbled by your very generous introduction. Thank you, Paul Frum, for setting up this lecture tonight. Thank you, Barbara Kalashka, the member of the Zundel team with whom I have had most contact over the last 2 years. It's amazing how time flies. It's been over 2 years already. You know my topic for tonight. I was asked to speak for about 45 minutes, so conveniently there's a clock right in front of me, so I'll keep my eye on the clock. I will begin my talk tonight in similar fashion to the way I begin the book, The Jewish Onslaught. I was minding my business, teaching my course on African American history at Wellesley College in February of 1993, as I had done for 20 years, when a strange thing happened. The long arm of Jewish intolerance reached into my classroom. On the first day of the semester, 2 students from a Jewish students' organization known as Hillel, unknown to me, were in the classroom. I thought they were simply people who were getting ready to take the class. They remained in the classroom for all of 1 day. They never came back. But that 1 day was enough to convince them that I was an anti-Semite, that I was teaching an anti-Semitic book, as they put it, as truth, quote, unquote. The book was a book published by the Nation of Islam, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. It's a relationship which, in a sense, is not secret, because Jewish scholars themselves for many years have documented their involvement in the transatlantic slave trade of Africans that brought Africans from the African continent to the Americas. Even though the material had been published for a long time in scholarly tomes hidden away in libraries, and in that sense was not really secret, yet and still there was an element of secrecy about it, because the average person, Jew or non-Jew, really was not very aware of that very significant Jewish involvement in the African slave trade. I myself, as a professor of black history, and as one who had taught black history for over 20 years, for 20 years at Wellesley College, for a couple of years before that elsewhere, I myself was only vaguely aware of the Jewish involvement in the African slave trade. By some accident perhaps, or maybe by some design, the textbooks, most of the textbooks that most people read dealing with the slave trade, even when they mention Jewish involvement, they never identify those involved as Jews. One walks away from those books with the impression that all of these people must have been Christians, when it's to the detriment of some other group, they would normally identify that group. But whenever Jews are the ones who are doing wrong, somehow they tend to tiptoe around the question of ethnicity. So here was someone like myself who had taught, who had studied this for over 20 years, and I was only vaguely aware of the Jewish involvement in the African slave trade. The book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, had been published about a year or 2 earlier. I had seen an advertisement for the book. I had bought it. I was very fascinated by the information, and I did then what I always do as a hopefully good teacher, and that is, whenever I discover new exciting material, I modify my course syllabus. I add it to the course. I like to keep my students abreast of new information as I gather new information. So that's what I did. I included this material in my course outline. It so happens that by the time I got around to putting the book into my course outline, the Jewish organizations had apparently already, become aware of the book, and they had already made a decision that this was a book that was to be suppressed at all costs.
Now, you all right? Take a deep breath.
Yes, sir.
No, just take a deep breath. In volume 1 of The Secret Relationship, it goes into the horror of the transatlantic slave trade. And the Jewish people were heavily involved in that. How many of you have been to Elmina Castle at Cape Coast in Ghana? Would you raise your hands? If you were there 15 years ago, on the doors of the castle, you would see a Star of David. If you go there now, they took it down, because they did not want you to understand the connection that they have to the transatlantic slave trade. It's all documented. I mean, with thousands of footnotes, so that you wouldn't think we made this up.
Very rapidly thereafter, apparently they went to the Jewish rabbi on campus. I'm still not sure if they acted independently. My suspicion is that from the very beginning they may very well have been in collusion with someone else, but I don't know. They went to the rabbi called me, tried to set up a meeting. They went to the chair of my department, Africana Studies. They went to the dean of the college, one Nancy Kolodny, who apparently is a very observant Jew. They went to everybody they could. I told the rabbi when she called me, I said to her, well, okay, I'll tell you what. If you think that this book is racist and anti-Semitic, and I ought not to be teaching it, she wanted to come to my office to have a meeting with me. So I told her, well, I have a better idea. Why don't you come to my class? If you think the book is so awful, I will give you an opportunity to come to my class and to talk to my class directly about how awful this book is. I will let the class read the book, and then I'll let them decide for themselves whether what you said was true or whether what I say, that the book is, a straight, factual account of the Jewish involvement in the slave trade is correct. This, to me, for anybody genuinely seeking truth, would have been a golden opportunity, to bypass me and come direct to my students. She said yes, she would. But of course, having reconsidered it for a day or two, she called me back and said no, she didn't think that was a good idea. And this became, the pattern that was to replicate itself over and over for the next several years. I've discovered in this battle with these folks for the last several years that they never like to flush out the truth in a normal, open fashion. They seem to operate best when they can use their leverage over whatever in the media or whatever to defame you from a distance, but they avoid open debate as much as possible. So she preferred to stay in the background and write memos and stuff, but she would not come to my class to confront me in front of my students. Things escalated again very rapidly. We have an institution called Academic Council, whereby it's basically a faculty meeting that takes place periodically. A few weeks afterwards, I'm not sure precisely when, I went to an Academic Council meeting, and to my surprise, my chairperson, another black person like myself, from my own department, obviously Africana Studies, to my surprise, he got up and made an impassioned speech denouncing me as an anti-Semite. He was followed by a Jewish professor. They had set this up prior to the meeting. This was an unusual procedure for an academic council meeting, but they had obviously set this up. So he was followed by a guy called Larry Rosenwald, a Jewish professor, who did the same thing. And from that point on, you could say the battle was joined. Things went downhill very rapidly. The student newspaper began publishing these inflammatory articles encouraging students to boycott my classes and so on. At the next meeting of the Academic Council, I asked for permission to respond to the speeches that had been made, by the Africana Studies chairman and Larry Rosenwald. They gave me permission, and I spoke. My speech is actually reprinted in the book, The Jewish Onslaught. It's near the end of the book. It's called An Answer to My Jewish Critics. I basically told them that I was, a historian. I had to take the facts wherever the facts took me. I explained to them that I had been teaching this course at Wellesley College for 20 years. I had dealt with the involvement of Christians and Muslims, even African collaborators in the slave trade. Wherever the facts took me, I went. I had become aware of the Jewish involvement, and I saw no reason why anybody should object to my dealing with the Jewish involvement. And I asked them rhetorically, who were they who gave them the authority to come into my classroom to tell me what I should teach, what I should not teach. And who were they, people who claimed to have been the victims of great suffering, what kind of authority did that give them to come and try to introduce this kind of extreme censorship into my classroom? A large contingent of my students were present in the academic council. They were not supposed to be there, but they came anyway. They tried to get them out, but they stayed. And of course, I was greeted with much applause from my students. I was greeted with stony silence from the rest of the gathering. At this time at Wellesley College was under the power and authority of a large number of Jewish people. The image of Wellesley College that most people have who know about Wellesley is a college which is the bastion of the WASP element, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant element. And that may be what it was a long time ago, but in recent years, the Jewish element has emerged as a very powerful force. And at one time, during the early stages of this Jewish onslaught at Wellesley College, I actually faced a situation where the acting president of the school was a Jew. The dean of the college was a Jew. The head of student government was a Jew. The assistant head, deputy head of student government was a Jew. The head of the board of trustees was a Jew. Possibly the majority of the tenured faculty were Jews. Many of the major figures in key positions, vice president of this and that, those kinds of folks, dean of this and that, a lot of those folks were Jews. So clearly, literally, I was dealing with a school in which Jewish power was entrenched. And that was the context in which I had to deal now with this Jewish onslaught.